The first thing people always said about my wife was that she was exceptional at her job. Not good, not competent, exceptional. The kind of manager people remembered years later, mentioned in job interviews when asked about influential leaders, cited in exit surveys as a reason they'd stayed at the company as long as they had. She had a gift for making people feel seen, for knowing, without being told, when someone on her team needed encouragement and when they needed to be pushed, when to hold a door open and when to let someone fail just enough to grow. Her staff brought her coffee on her birthday. They invited her to their weddings. One of her former analysts, a young woman named Priya who'd moved to Singapore for a senior role, still sent Claire a card every Christmas. Her name was Rachel, though professionally she still used her maiden name, Calloway. Rachel Calloway, Director of Strategic Operations at Meridian Group, a mid-sized logistics consulting firm with offices in 4 cities and a reputation for eating its junior staff alive and producing its senior staff like polished stones, hard and valuable and slightly cold. She had been director for 3 years. She had been exceptional at every job before that for the 12 years of her career that preceded it. I had always been proud of her. That was the thing I kept coming back to in the months after everything collapsed. The specific quality of the pride I'd felt, and how completely it had obscured everything else. My name is Joel. I was 41. I taught high school history at a private school 20 minutes from our house. A job I loved with the particular quiet passion of someone who has never needed his work to make him important. We had been married for 9 years. We had a son, Nathan, who was 7, gap-toothed and loud and obsessed with dinosaurs in the way that 7-year-old boys tend to be obsessed with things. Completely, encyclopedically, without irony. We lived in a house with a porch and a maple tree in the front yard that turned a color in October that I had never found an adequate word for. We had, I believed, a good life. I found out about the first one on a Tuesday in March when a phone call came to our landline. We still had a landline, a fact that Rachel always mocked gently, from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer it. The voice on the other end was male, young, slightly unsteady in the way of someone who has rehearsed a thing and is now terrified of actually saying it. He asked if I was Joel Dorn. I said I was. He said his name was Connor Reeves and that he worked at Meridian Group and that he was very sorry to be calling and that he thought I should know that he and my wife had been involved and that it had ended 3 months ago and that he was telling me because he couldn't carry it anymore and because he thought I deserved to know. Then he hung up. I stood in the kitchen with the landline receiver in my hand for a long time. Nathan was in the next room building a Lego set with the focused intensity he brought to construction projects. I could hear the small plastic clicks of pieces fitting together. I put the receiver back in its cradle. I went and stood in the doorway of the living room and watched my son build his thing. 3 months ago, I thought. It had ended 3 months ago, which meant it had started before that. The opening establishes a central and devastating irony. The very qualities that made Rachel exceptional as a leader, her ability to make people feel seen, her intuition for what each person needed, her gift for connection, are the same qualities that enabled and sustained her betrayals. Joel's pride in his wife is not naivety. It is the reasonable response of a man married to someone genuinely impressive. But pride, the story suggests from its first paragraphs, can function as a kind of blindness. Not the blindness of inattention, but the blindness of positive assumption. The tendency to interpret a person's strengths as a guarantee of their character across all contexts. The phone call from Connor Reeves is structurally brilliant in its abruptness. There is no build-up, no accumulating suspicion, just a young man's voice, rehearsed and terrified, delivering information that reorganizes everything. The detail that Connor hung up immediately after speaking is psychologically precise. He needed to say the thing, but he could not bear the conversation that would follow it. And the final line, it had started before that, is the story's first real wound. Not the affair itself, but the sudden arithmetic of duration. Joel is not just learning that something happened. He is learning that something was already over before he knew it had begun. Rachel had been promoted to director in the spring 3 years ago, and the change had been, from where I stood, almost entirely positive. She was energized in a way she hadn't been in years, sharper at dinner, more engaged with Nathan's bedtime stories, quicker to laugh. She bought new work clothes and wore them with the particular satisfaction of someone who had earned the right to look the part. She worked longer hours, yes, and some weekends she was distracted in the way of a person whose mind has not fully come home even when their body has. But none of that had seemed alarming. It had seemed like the natural texture of a significant career step. I had adjusted. I had covered more of Nathan's morning routines and school pickups. I had made dinner more often than not and kept the house running in the way that needed to be kept running, and I had done it without resentment because I believed in what she was building and I wanted to be the kind of partner who made space for it. Connor had joined her team approximately 8 months after her promotion. I knew the name, vaguely. She'd mentioned him in the way she mentioned her staff, briefly, contextually, as a function of a story about work rather than as a person of independent significance. He was 28, I later learned. A project coordinator, ambitious, apparently talented in the specific way that Rachel tended to notice and cultivate, raw ability that needed direction. She had a type, professionally, not romantically, or so I had always assumed. She gravitated toward people with potential they hadn't yet organized into ambition, and she helped them do that. It was one of the things that made her extraordinary at her job. Looking back now, I can identify the period when things shifted. It was approximately 14 months after Connor joined the team, so about 2 years into her directorship, about 2 years before the phone call. The changes were small, subtle enough that I assembled them only in retrospect, the way you assemble a sentence from letters that individually mean nothing. She started going to the gym in the evenings. This was new. She had always been a morning runner, up at 5:30 with the discipline of someone for whom routine was armor. The evening gym sessions were explained as a response to back pain, to a new trainer recommendation, to the fact that the morning schedule had become too compressed with Nathan's school start time. All reasonable. I had no framework for questioning them. Her phone acquired a second layer of security. The fingerprint lock, which she'd always had, was supplemented by a PIN that she changed, I noticed, approximately every 3 weeks. I noticed this because I occasionally needed to use her phone to call someone when mine was charging, and twice I found that the PIN I'd used before no longer worked. She gave me the new one without hesitation when I asked, which I took as evidence of transparency. I understand now that it was evidence of something more considered, that she was careful enough to appear unconcerned. There were the work drinks. Her team had always been social. This was part of her management philosophy, building cohesion through informal time together, but the frequency increased in that second year. Once every few weeks became almost weekly. She was home by 10, usually, sometimes 11, never later, until there were 2 occasions, for months apart, when she was not home until after midnight, and explained both times with a specificity that I found, at the time, reassuring. A junior member of the team had been struggling. She'd stayed to talk. They'd ended up at a late dinner. The junior member she named was not Connor Reeves. That detail, too, I assembled only later. There was one evening in November, 14 months before the phone call, so deep in a period I was only just beginning to understand, when she came home from what she described as a team dinner, and I was still awake, reading in bed, and she came in and sat on the edge of the mattress and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not guilt exactly, something quieter. Something like the expression a person makes when they are looking at something they are afraid of losing. I asked her if she was all right. She said yes. She said she was just tired. She got into bed and lay very still, and I read my book for another 10 minutes and turned off the light. And in the morning, everything was exactly as it had always been, and I forgot about the expression. I forgot about it for 14 months. This section maps the psychology of deliberate concealment executed with genuine sophistication. Rachel is not a careless deceiver. She is, as the story establishes, someone professionally skilled at reading people and managing their perceptions. Her transparency about the PIN, the reasonable explanations for each behavioral change, the careful specificity of her late-night alibis. These are not the fumbling cover stories of an impulsive person. They are the practiced adjustments of someone who understands that the most effective concealment looks like openness. Joel's trust is not exploited through his weakness, but through his strength, his fundamental respect for her autonomy, his belief in her competence, his pride in her career. A more suspicious husband might have questioned the gym sessions or the altered pins. Joel's version of love included giving her room, and that room, generously given, was the space in which the deception operated. The November night, and the expression he cannot name but registers and then forgets, is the story's most quietly tragic moment in this section. Something in him recognized a signal. The healthy architecture of his trust routed it into a benign category and moved on. This is not stupidity. It is the normal function of a mind that has no existing model for what it is seeing. We interpret what we experience through the frameworks we already have. Joel had no framework for this. So he forgot. I didn't call Connor Reeves back. I didn't have his number. He'd called from a cell I didn't recognize, and I hadn't written it down before I registered what was happening. For 3 days after the call, I went through the ordinary mechanics of my life. Classes, Nathan's school run, dinner, the specific choreography of a weekday household, while carrying the information the way you carry a stone in your shoe, constantly, with a limp you try not to show. Rachel noticed nothing, or if she did, she said nothing. She was in the middle of a project delivery cycle at work and came home each evening with the distracted, performance-drained quality she had in those periods, present but running on reserve. We ate dinner together. We watched television. We talked about Nathan's upcoming school play, for which he had been cast as a triceratops and was taking the role with the seriousness of a method actor. On the 4th day, I called Owen. No, I'm sorry, that was the other story. On the 4th day, I called my brother, Daniel, who was 2 years older than me and worked as a financial investigator and had the specific trait of being completely unemotional about other people's crises in a way that was occasionally infuriating and frequently invaluable. Start from the beginning, he said when I told him. I started from the beginning. You need to know 3 things, he said when I finished. Whether it's true, how long it went on, and whether it's actually over. In that order. Don't confront until you know all 3. I started. I know how he sounded. That doesn't tell you what's true. Get the facts first. I asked him how. Start with what you can verify without her knowing, he said. Phone records if you have access. Financial records. Her calendar. Look for patterns, not incidents. I had access to our joint account and to the family phone plan, which covered both our numbers. That evening, after Nathan was in bed and Rachel was on a call in her office, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and looked at our phone plan's call and message logs for the first time in the 3 years we'd been on the same plan together. The logs showed call duration and number, not content. I was looking for a number that appeared with unusual frequency. I found 2. The first was a number that appeared dozens of times across the past 18 months, calls and texts both, often in the evenings, sometimes on weekends. The frequency had been high between 15 and 9 months ago, then tapered and essentially stopped around 3 months ago, which aligned, almost exactly, with what Connor had told me. The second number was newer. It had appeared in the logs beginning approximately 4 months ago, just as the first was fading. It appeared less frequently than the first had at its peak, but the pattern had a particular quality I recognized from the first set. Evening clusters, weekend outliers, the occasional very late-night exchange. I sat with this for a long time. Then I typed the second number into a reverse lookup service. The result came back with a name, Marcus Holt. Age 31. Listed address in the Meridian Group Business District. I searched the Meridian Group company directory, which was partially public on their website. Marcus Holt, Senior Project Analyst. Rachel's department. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark kitchen. From Rachel's office down the hall, I could hear the low, modulated cadence of her professional voice. Confident, measured, completely in control. The following week, I created a reason to visit her office. I'd done it once before, 2 years ago, bringing her lunch during a particularly brutal project week. She'd seemed genuinely pleased that time, had introduced me to several people on her team with the warm, slightly proprietary ease of a person showing you something they're proud of. I used the same pretext now. Tuesday lunchtime. A bag of food from the Thai place near her building that she liked. The receptionist recognized me and waved me through. The open-plan floor of her department was busy, screens glowing, the low murmur of focused work, the particular atmosphere of a team mid-delivery. I spotted Rachel through the glass wall of a small meeting room, deep in conversation with a woman I didn't recognize. And I saw, at a standing desk near the far window, a man I assumed was Marcus Holt. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of physically assured that reads differently in a professional environment than it does anywhere else, slightly incongruous, like a piece of furniture slightly too large for a room. He was perhaps 30 or 31, dark-haired, with the specific, focused frown of someone working through a problem. He had not noticed me. Rachel had. She emerged from the meeting room and crossed the floor toward me, and there was a microsecond, I almost missed it, in which her eyes moved from me to the man at the far window and back. It lasted no longer than a blink. Her smile did not waver. "This is such a nice surprise," she said, and kissed me on the cheek, and took the bag. She introduced me to several people. Not to Marcus Holt. He had turned back to his screen. His posture had changed very slightly. Something in the shoulders, a controlled stillness that was different from the focused stillness of before. I shook hands and smiled, and stayed for 20 minutes and drove home. The revelation of a second number, a second name, transforms the story's central question from "is it true" to "how deep does it go?" Joel arrives at his brother's prescribed methodology, verify before confronting, and applies it with the careful, methodical temperament that defines his character. He is a history teacher, someone professionally trained to examine evidence, to distinguish primary sources from interpretation, to resist the seductive narrative before the facts support it. But the facts, when they arrive, are more complex than he anticipated. Connor Reeves was not the whole picture. Marcus Holt is a second chapter that was already being written while the first was ending. This is the story's first major structural twist, and it reframes the phone call from Connor in a new light. Connor did not call to confess an ongoing affair. He called to confess a finished one, possibly because he had learned, or suspected, that he had been replaced. The visit to Rachel's office is a masterwork of controlled observation. Joel is not there to confront. He is there to see. And what he sees is telling, not because of what Rachel does, but because of the microsecond in which she doesn't. That single involuntary eye movement, from Joel to Marcus and back, is the body's honesty breaking through the performance of the mind. Marcus Holt's shifted posture tells the same story from the other side. Two people in a room who know something, briefly visible to a third who was not supposed to know anything. I want to be precise about what I felt during this period, because I think the popular understanding of betrayal tends to flatten it into a single emotion, rage, or grief, or humiliation, and my experience was none of those things cleanly. It was all of them at once, layered in proportions that shifted hourly, and underneath all of it was something I didn't have a name for until much later, which I now think was the specific disorientation of discovering that your map of reality has been wrong for a long time, and that you have been navigating confidently with incorrect information. I was a history teacher. I knew, intellectually, that people rewrote their own narratives. That memory was constructed, not recorded. That the story a person told about their own life was always a selection, an emphasis, a version. I had taught this to 17-year-olds for 15 years. I had not, apparently, considered its application to my own marriage. I called Connor Reeves through the school's landline records. His number was in the incoming call log, and he answered on the second ring with the voice of someone who had been expecting the call for weeks. "I should have given you more time," he said immediately. "I need to ask you some questions," I said. "I know. We met at a coffee place near the school on a Thursday afternoon, at a corner table that felt, in retrospect, like the setting for a conversation neither of us had ever expected to be having." Connor was younger than I'd imagined from his voice, or not younger, but less formed, with the particular quality of a person who is still deciding what kind of person he is. He was earnest in a way that was painful to witness, because it coexisted with the fact of what he'd done. He told me it had begun 16 months ago. A work event, the team's annual strategy offsite, held at a hotel outside the city for 2 nights. He was specific and steady in his recounting, in the manner of someone who had rehearsed it not for persuasion but for accuracy, because accuracy was the only thing he had left to offer. It had lasted 9 months. It had ended, he said, not because either of them had chosen to end it, but because of what he described as a gradual cooling. Her attention, which had once been focused on him with an intensity he now understood had felt like a searchlight, had simply begun to move away. He had not known about Marcus Holt. The look on his face when I told him confirmed that. She didn't, he stopped. He looked at the table. No, she wouldn't have. I asked him what he meant. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "She was very good at making you feel like you were the only person in the room. That was the thing about her. That's what I thought." He stopped again. I think I was wrong about what that meant. I drove home from that meeting and sat in the car in our driveway, and watched the maple tree in the front yard for a long time. The leaves were just beginning to come in. It was late March, tentative green at the tips of the branches, that particular fragile quality of early spring that always seemed to promise more than it had yet delivered. Over the following 2 weeks, I documented everything methodically. I printed the phone log records and annotated them. I made a timeline. Connor, 16 months ago. The cooling and conclusion, 3 months ago. Marcus Holt's number appearing 4 months ago, 1 month before Connor's exit. An overlap of 30 days that I found particularly difficult to absorb. I made note of the financial records. There were dinners, hotels, charges I could identify now that I had a framework. I photographed the documents and stored them in a folder on a cloud account Rachel didn't have access to. I also did something that I am not entirely comfortable admitting, which is that I drove to the Meridian Group building on 2 separate evenings and sat in my car across the street and watched the entrance. I am not sure what I was hoping to see. Confirmation, perhaps, of the thing I already knew but couldn't stop trying to undeniably establish. The second evening I saw them leave together. Rachel and Marcus Holt, emerging from the building at 8:15, close in the way people are close when they have forgotten that they are visible. She was talking, animated, with the specific brightness she carried when she was engaged by something. He was listening with the particular attention of a man who finds the person speaking to him genuinely, dangerously interesting. They walked together to the end of the block and turned the corner and were gone. I sat in the car. A bus went past. Someone walked a dog. The city made its noises. I drove home and made dinner for Nathan and helped him with his Triceratops lines for the school play and put him to bed and read him 2 chapters of the book we were working through. And when Rachel came home at 10:30 and said she'd been in a late team session and asked if there was anything left in the pot, I said yes and heated it for her and watched her eat and said nothing that I was thinking. Connor description of Rachel, very good at making you feel like you were the only person in the room, is the section's emotional center and its most damning line. It recontextualizes her professional gift into something more troubling. The same quality that made her a beloved manager, the same attentiveness that earned her Christmas cards from former analysts in Singapore, was also the mechanism of seduction. She did not pursue Connor or Marcus with recklessness or passion, the story suggests. She pursued them with skill, the same skill she applied to motivating a struggling team member or identifying a junior employee's potential. This is not an exoneration. It is a more unsettling portrait. Not a woman undone by feeling, but one who deployed intimacy with the same deliberate intentionality she brought to performance reviews and strategic planning. The overlap, Marcus beginning 1 month before Connor's exit, is the detail that most clearly establishes this as pattern rather than impulse. She did not fall into a new attachment while the old one ended. She managed the transition. The 2 evenings of surveillance Joel conducts are the story's most morally ambiguous moments for its narrator. He knows this is not characteristic of him. He does it anyway. This is what sustained betrayal does to people who would not otherwise recognize themselves in such behavior. It creates a version of you that you can only explain, not quite justify, as the product of a situation you did not make. I chose a Saturday morning. Nathan was at a birthday party, a classmate, a bowling alley across town, 3 hours from drop-off to pick-up. I had arranged this without Rachel knowing I'd chosen it deliberately, without flagging that I needed the house empty in the particular way I was going to need it. She was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, dressed for a run she hadn't taken yet, scrolling through her phone with the Saturday morning ease of someone not yet armored for the day. She looked up when I came in. She smiled. I put the folder on the kitchen table. It was a physical folder, printed documents, the phone log with my annotations, the financial records, the 2-page timeline I'd made. I had debated this. Digital evidence can feel abstract. I wanted something she could hold, that'd weight. She looked at the folder. She looked at me. "What is this?" she said. "Sit down," I said. "Please." She sat. She opened the folder. She looked at the first page, the phone log, for a long moment without expression. Then she turned to the timeline. She was quiet for long enough that I could hear the refrigerator, the tick of the kitchen clock, a car passing outside. "Connor called me," I said. "In March." On the landline. Something moved across her face. Not surprise, something more complicated. "He told you," she said. "He told me about himself. I found out about Marcus Holt independently." She set the folder down. She pressed both hands flat on the table in front of her, the gesture of someone bracing. How long have you known? She said. About Connor, 6 weeks. About Marcus, 5. And you've been, she looked at me. You've been here. This whole time. Making dinner. Making dinner, I confirmed. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was something there that I hadn't expected. Not shame, not fear, but a kind of exhausted directness, as if the performance had required so much for so long that its ending was almost a physical relief. I don't know what you want me to say, she said. I want you to tell me the truth, I said. The actual truth, without managing it. I want to know if you're capable of that. Something shifted in her face at that last sentence. That's fair, she said. Quietly. Connor, I said. 16 months. From the strategy offsite. 15, she said. 15 months. And Marcus? For months. You overlapped them. She didn't look away. Yes. By a month. Yes. Was there anyone before Connor? A pause. No. Are you certain? Yes. Joel, she stopped. Yes. I'm certain. I believed her. I'm still not entirely sure why, but I did. Tell me why, I said. Not the sequence. The why. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I wondered whether she was composing an answer or genuinely trying to find one. I don't think it was about them, she said finally. I think that's the honest answer. It wasn't about Connor specifically or Marcus specifically. It was about, she paused. When I became director, something happened to how I saw myself. How I felt about myself in that role. I don't know how to say this without it sounding like an excuse. Say it anyway. I needed to be seen in a way that felt separate from being your wife. Separate from being Nathan's mother. I needed to be someone who was just chosen. Independently. For herself. She looked at me. That's not an excuse. I know that's not an excuse. No, I said. It's not. But it's the truth. And us. I said. While this was happening, what were we? She looked at the table. Real, she said. We were real. That was also real. I know how that sounds. Like it's supposed to make me feel better. No, she said. Like it's supposed to be honest. We sat across from each other for a long time. Nathan would be at the bowling alley for another 90 minutes. The clock ticked. The house held its breath. Marcus, I said. Is it over? I ended it 10 days ago, she said. Because you knew I was close to confronting you. A pause. Because I was going to. I was going to tell you. I know you don't believe that. I don't know what I believe, I said. That's the problem. I know, she said. I know that's the problem. I stood up. I picked up the folder and held it for a moment, and then put it back down on the table. I'm going to pick Nathan up from the party, I said. And then we're going to behave normally for the rest of today, because he is 7 years old, and he doesn't deserve to feel whatever is in this room right now. And then we're going to figure out what happens next, and it's going to take time, and I am not ready to tell you what I think yet. She nodded. She looked like someone standing in the wreckage of something they built themselves, not surprised by the collapse, exactly, but confronted by the scale of it. I picked up my keys and left. Rachel's explanation, I needed to be chosen, independently, for herself, is the story's most psychologically revealing moment, and also its most difficult one to evaluate. It is not a justification. She says so herself. But it is a genuine attempt at self-diagnosis from a woman who has spent years being highly competent at understanding other people's internal states and considerably less practiced at examining her own. The need she describes, to exist as someone separate from her relational roles, to be desired outside the context of wife and mother, is a recognizable human experience. What is not recognizable, or rather what is not defensible, is the method she chose to meet that need. Not conversation, not therapy, not honest reckoning with her husband, but a series of subordinate relationships that she managed with the same skills she applied to her professional life. The word chosen is key. She chose people over whom she had structural power, employees, people whose careers she influenced, people for whom her attention carried professional weight. Whether she was conscious of this dynamic or not, it ensured that the attention she received was never entirely free of the imbalance she had created. Joel's final speech, "We're going to behave normally for the rest of today because he is 7 years old," is the confrontation scene's moral core. In the middle of the worst conversation of his life, he is thinking about his son. He is a father first. This is who he has always been, and it is also, the story suggests, part of what Rachel had stopped fully seeing. We tried. I want to say that first, because I think it matters, not as a defense of the outcome, but as a record of the intention. For 4 months after the confrontation, we tried, with the specific, effortful sincerity of two people who have something real worth trying to save and are not yet certain whether the damage has made saving it possible. We saw a therapist, separately at first, then together, a woman named Dr. Anand who had the particular gift of asking questions that felt simple until you tried to answer them. Rachel told me things in those sessions that she had not told me in 9 years of marriage, and I told her things in return, and some of what was exchanged in that room was illuminating, and some of it was painful in the way that honest accounting always is, and some of it arrived too late to change what it might have changed. Rachel resigned from Meridian Group in May. She said it was her decision. I believed that. It was consistent with the Rachel I knew, the one who understood that you could not rebuild something in the same environment that had produced its destruction. She took a senior role at a smaller organization, a nonprofit, a lateral move professionally, but a significant reduction in the structural dynamics that had characterized her life at Meridian. She seemed, in that new context, more like herself, or more like the self I had married, which is not quite the same thing but was close enough to give me something to hold on to. Connor Reeves, as far as I knew, remained at Meridian Group. I found out later, through a mutual professional acquaintance, that he had been moved to a different team. Whether this was his doing or someone else's, I never established. Marcus Holt left the company in June. I did not know whether Rachel knew this, and I did not ask, because by June I had arrived at the specific place in a crisis where the questions whose answers would only hurt without informing started to feel less necessary than they once had. What finally ended the marriage was not a single thing. It was the accumulation of a kind of knowledge that, once acquired, could not be unknown. I had learned something about how Rachel's mind worked, about the gap between what she understood intellectually and what she was willing to apply to herself, that I could not unlearn. She was perceptive about everyone except herself. She could identify, with extraordinary precision, what a struggling team member needed, what a difficult board member feared, what a junior analyst was really asking when they asked something oblique. But when it came to her own needs, her own discomforts, her own choices, she had a blind spot so thoroughly maintained that it had functioned, for years, as a kind of permission structure. I don't think she chose that blind spot consciously. I don't think she woke up and decided to be dishonest with herself. I think the blindness was something she had grown around, the way a tree grows around a wound, so gradually and completely that the wound becomes structural, part of the shape of the thing. But the effect was the same, regardless of the process. We separated in September, 6 months after the confrontation. Nathan was 8 by then, old enough to understand that something was changing and not yet old enough to understand why. We told him that we both loved him and that some things between grown-ups become too complicated to fix and that none of it was his fault or his responsibility. He asked if he would still be able to see both of us every week. We said yes. He asked if the Triceratops poster could stay on his wall in both houses. We said yes to that too. He seemed, with the stunning pragmatism of children, to accept these terms. I moved into an apartment near the school that autumn, a second-floor place with big windows and not enough closet space and a kitchen that smelled of the previous tenant's coffee, which I eventually stopped noticing and then began to find almost comforting. I set up Nathan's room there first, before my own, making sure he had his things in place before I worked out where I would sleep. I bought a small bookshelf for his dinosaur books, which had multiplied over the past year to a degree that suggested he was conducting some kind of systematic acquisition. I am not a man who arrived at the end of my marriage and felt free. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was grief, real, prolonged, and periodically ambushing, the way grief does, in the middle of ordinary things. A supermarket aisle, a school pickup, a Tuesday evening when Nathan was at Rachel's and the apartment was very quiet and the windows were dark. I grieved not just the marriage but the version of it I had believed in. The specific imagined life that had been, I now understood, partly constructed from my own generous assumptions as much as from any shared reality. But I also found, as the months passed, that there was something on the other side of the grief that I hadn't anticipated. Not happiness, exactly, not at first, but a kind of clarity. The clarity of a person who has had their most fundamental assumptions tested and discovered, in the process, which ones were actually load-bearing and which had only seemed to be. I knew who I was in a crisis. I knew that my first instinct, even in the worst moment, was to think about Nathan. I knew that I was capable of carrying a devastating truth for 6 weeks without fracturing. I knew that I could sit across a table from the person who had most profoundly hurt me and ask honest questions and listen to honest answers without needing to punish anyone. These were not small things to know about yourself. Rachel and I found, over the following year, a way of being Nathan's parents together that was functional and occasionally, in glimpses, almost warm. The warmth of two people who have known each other a long time and have stopped requiring anything from each other that the other cannot give. She was a good mother. She had always been a good mother. I held on to that as a fixed point when other things felt unsteady. Connor Reeves, I heard secondhand, had taken a new job in another city. I hope he found, in whatever came next, a better version of what he'd been looking for. He had been 28 and flattered by a form of attention whose full architecture he probably hadn't understood at the time. That didn't absolve him, but it contextualized him. What I think about now, when I think about all of it, is the word that Rachel used in the kitchen the morning of the confrontation: chosen. She had needed to feel chosen. What I understand, what I wish I had understood earlier, though I am not sure understanding it earlier would have changed the outcome, is that being chosen is not a feeling someone else can reliably manufacture for you. It has to begin, at some level, with choosing yourself, knowing what you need, asking for it honestly, trusting that the person across from you can be a real partner in meeting it rather than a failure to manage around. She didn't know how to do that. Maybe she does now. I genuinely hope so. As for me, I teach Roman history to 16-year-olds on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and I take Nathan for waffles every other Sunday. And I am slowly learning how to cook more than 6 things, and I water the plants on my apartment windowsill with the same reliable Sunday morning attention I once gave to a marriage I believed in. The belief was real. That still counts for something. I just needed to count for the next thing now, whatever that turns out to be. The resolution of this story is built around a word: chosen. Rachel's need to be chosen, to experience desire directed at her as an individual, independent of her roles, is the emotional key to everything that preceded it. But Joel's final reflection reframes that word with quiet precision. Being chosen, he now understands, cannot be sustainably provided by someone else. It must originate in a person's own relationship with themselves, in the capacity to know what you need, name it honestly, and trust a partner with it rather than seeking its simulation elsewhere. This is not a lesson delivered as accusation. It is the insight of a man who has done the painful work of genuine reflection and arrived at something useful rather than merely something bitter. The portrait of Rachel is complex to the end. She is a good mother. The story insists on that. She is someone who, in the new and smaller professional environment, seems more genuinely herself. The story does not punish her into caricature. It allows her to be what she actually is, a deeply capable person with a profound and sustained blind spot about her own interior life, who caused real damage and is living with its consequences. Joel's list of things he now knows about himself: that he thinks of Nathan first, that he can carry pain without fracturing, that he can listen honestly without needing to punish, is the story's true resolution. He has not arrived at peace through forgiveness or through rage. He has arrived at it through self-knowledge. And Nathan's Triceratops poster, installed in both houses before Joel's own bed is made, is the story's closing image of who this man fundamentally is. Someone who makes sure the people he loves have their things in place before he works out where he is going to sleep. That quality did not protect him from what happened, but it is also, the story suggests, exactly what will carry him through what comes next. This story is ultimately about the misuse of a genuine gift. Rachel Calloway possessed an authentic and remarkable ability, the capacity to make people feel truly seen, to identify what each person needed and provide it with precision and warmth. This gift made her an exceptional leader, a beloved manager, someone whose former employees sent Christmas cards a decade later. It also, when turned inward toward her own unmet needs and outward toward people over whom she held structural power, became the instrument of sustained and serious harm. The tragedy is not that her gift was false. It was real. The tragedy is that she applied it everywhere except the one place it was most needed: her own interior life, and the honest communication of that interior life to her husband. What the story traces, beneath the sequence of affairs and discoveries, is the long erosion of a marriage that was never catastrophically wrong, but was gradually, quietly insufficient. Insufficient not because Joel failed her, but because Rachel never asked him, honestly and vulnerably, for what she actually needed. She managed her dissatisfaction the way she managed everything else, skillfully, autonomously, and without admitting that she couldn't handle it alone. The two men, Connor and Marcus, were not the cause of the marriage's failure. They were the symptom of a need that had no legitimate channel. Joel's journey from discovery to resolution models something important: that the opposite of betrayal is not suspicion or vigilance, but the kind of sustained, honest presence that asks real questions and creates genuine space for real answers. He was, by every measure, that kind of husband. The story does not resolve this into a simple moral. His decency was not sufficient to prevent what happened, because what happened was not about his adequacy. It was about Rachel's inability to be as honest with herself as she was perceptive about everyone else. The ficus, no, the plants on the windowsill, watered every Sunday, closed this story the same way the original closed its, with a man who shows up reliably for the small things, because the small things, done consistently and with intention, are what a life is actually made of.